Lately, talk of gender has been in the media like never before. Even the idea of transgenderism has been such a taboo subject in years past that it was regulated only to trashy talk shows and movie portrayals of murderous psychopaths. Today we are seeing reputable sources such as Newsweek, Entertainment Tonight, and 2020 normalizing and advocating for transgender people. Throughout these years of transition, Colorado's own Gender Identity Center has been at the forefront. Here to talk more about the Gender Identity Center, we have with us two members of the Board of Directors. Our first guest is Eden Lane, chairwoman for the Colorado Gold Rush, the largest event for the Gender Identity Center, and author of an upcoming book, Charm Bracelet. I'd also like to introduce Alex Brown, who is a group leader for the Female to Male Support Group, the Gender Identity Center, and has been living as a man for the past 2 years. Thank you both for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Well, let's start out with just what are we really talking about. Alex, could you tell us a little about what gender dysphoria is?
Well, basically, each of us has an internal sense of the gender that we are, and most people never question this because that sense matches up with their bodies. But people who have so-called gender dysphoria experience a disconnect. Their sense of gender does not match up with their anatomy.
Gender dysphoria is the term that's derived from the DSM, which is the diagnostic manual that psychologists use to help various disorders. And gender dysphoria is still listed there as a diagnostic tool because it's not well understood what causes it. However, it's as if you ask your brother or your sister, when did you know you were a boy or a girl? Well, they can't pinpoint that. They always know. The disconnect that Alex referred to only occurs as you start to notice that there are social differences in the way people react to you and expect you to react because of your body, not because of who you are. Early 70s, homosexuality was still listed in the DSM, and that has since been removed in the early 70s, and at some point perhaps gender dysphoria will be moved out of that diagnostic tool as well.
Because right now it seems like we're classifying people with transgenderism as having a mental illness, at least according to the medical and psychological professionals. Do you see that as changing? Alex, what are your thoughts?
I think eventually it will change. I think it will probably stay as a medical diagnosis because certainly the treatment for it is a medical treatment.
My favorite response is from last summer's movie Transamerica, where she said to her doctor, don't you find it funny that a mental illness can be corrected with cosmetic surgery? So I think it will in fact be a medical diagnosis in the future. I just don't know how soon we'll get there.
Sure. It doesn't make a lot of sense right now having that kind of cure for something that we say is a developmental problem.
That's true, but for now it's the only tool we have, so we have to take advantage of it as best we can.
So let's talk about the Gender Identity Center specifically. What kind of services do they offer? Alex, I'm going to ask you this question. What kind of services does the Gender Identity Center offer to people who may be struggling with that gender dysphoria?
The Gender Identity Center offers various support groups to people at various points in their transition, from those people who are just starting to question, ask questions, trying to find more information, to support as people go through this process and helping them with the changes that have to happen with their families, work, living day-to-day life, finding therapists, finding reputable local doctors, all these kinds of this kind of information. And then we also try to do outreach to the community to build associations with other parts of the GLBT community, and then just the community as a whole, just to educate people about what gender identity is about.
Sure. So not only helping the person directly through those support groups, but really helping society understand that person as well.
Exactly.
We're able to accomplish that mostly with our Speakers Bureau and outreach to other community organizations, whether they're part of the LGBT community or not. Just last fall, we helped by speaking to a victims advocate group, which was in one of the Front Range police stations. But also, we provide support to family members of people who are transgender or think they may be transgender. If they have a spouse, a brother, a child who may be diagnosed as being transgender or at least think that they might be, there's also support services that are required for those people in the family as well, because it could be something that's very difficult to accept, and they don't know how to support their loved ones. So we provide that sort of support for them as well.
And that was actually going to be my next question. Is kind of, I've seen this trend of not only gay and lesbians coming out earlier and earlier, but certainly transgender people coming out earlier and earlier. In 2020, they showed children as young as 6, 7, 8 years old saying, "I'm the other gender."
The biggest difference there is not so much them coming out and saying that they're transgender, because obviously at 3 and 5 and 6 and whatever age, they're not using those words. What's different now is the way people are perceiving that and their awareness so that they can react to it. When people were children in our generation, if they said that they felt that they were the opposite gender, they either thought it was a phase or that they might be gay, and it was often considered either something to ignore or a great crisis. What you see now in the examples that Barbara Walters showed on 2020, that wonderful organization is a group of parents that are finding the tools they need to support their children, who may ultimately turn out to be transgender or may not. But they're reacting differently to what they're hearing their children say. The children have always said these sorts of things. Anecdotally, when you read biographies of transgendered adults, they will often have said that they knew this very early on. So it's not so much that it's starting to reveal itself earlier, it's that we're aware enough to pay attention earlier.
And at least the parents are saying, I'm open enough to talk to somebody about
some parents.
this. Right.
Some parents.
Yeah. And there are also resources such as therapists. I mean, we saw therapists on the 2020 that Barbara Walters did, doctors who have experience treating children who have gender identity disorder.
Right here in Colorado, there are physicians that have experience and openness to helping families who have children who identify themselves as transgender early on, and we can provide those sorts of resources at the Gender Identity Center.
Excellent. And you said something about giving the parents those tools to help deal with their child, or help deal with society, really, dealing with that child.
Yes, those are different sets of tools.
Yes. So what kind of tools could I expect to develop? Let's say I have a 6-year-old who may be saying that they feel they're the other gender. Alex, what do you see as something that I could gain from the Gender Identity Center?
Well, I think first there are probably connections to other people who have been through that, and I think that can be really important. I know, not dealing with children, but when I started to transition, that for my partner at the time, and still current partner, reaching out, having other people who had gone through exactly the same thing was very important. And so that certainly, those kinds of connections, or referrals to, again, reputable therapists, medical doctors.
And as a mother myself, I know how disturbing it can be when you're afraid for your child, not just based on what you might perceive the medical condition to be, but what kind of world will they face where it's something so different. If you have a gay or lesbian child or a transgender child, those concerns are the same, because the hate that causes the world to be difficult for gay and lesbian children is the same hate that causes it to be difficult for transgender children. So what it can be is, even if it's later in life as teenagers, we can help you locate resources, not just for therapy and doctors and for your children and for yourself, but also peer groups for those teenagers, so that they don't feel isolated, so that they can feel as if there is hope for a positive future, instead of falling into the kind of environment where some young trans women, for example, end up taking a route that leaves them away from education, so that they are not employable, and they can often fall prey to medical quackery, such as silicone pumping parties and that sort of thing. And so we're able to help them help their teenagers avoid those pitfalls.
Excellent. It sounds like there's a lot of good things going on there. I was looking at your website, and I noticed that you had been established in 1978, and I was amazed. I was very
neither of us actually.
Right. Gender Identity Center as a whole. Thank you for reminding me. What kind of changes has the center seen in the last 30 years in terms of how we see transgender people and how the public sees transgender people? Alex, why don't you speak about that?
Well, I think we've touched on one of those already, is that we're seeing people come out at younger and younger ages, which is great because, then they'll have the experience of living, in their gender for longer periods of time without this conflict. So that's great. Another one is, just wider, more talk about gender. I can't imagine, if I had talked about this when I was 8 years old or whatever, I'm thankful that no one took me to a psychiatrist, because who knows what they would have done. So just more public acceptance. Let's see, what else? There was something else. I think.
Well, I would say that within the larger LGBT community, there's a vast difference between now and 1978. In 1978, the whole LGBT movement was at its infancy, basically, even though it had begun in the summer of '69. Transgender people, even though the word didn't exist then, were at the forefront of that movement. And by 1978, the political movement wanted to be more assimilated and more mainstream, so people who didn't quite fit that mold were pushed to the side. And since then, that has changed a great deal. The Human Rights Campaign Fund, which is now known as the Human Rights Campaign, even has completely done a turnaround and embraced transgendered people and their families, so much so that they've actually partnered with the National Center for Transgender Equality and part of lobby days, including legislation to protect employment discrimination and for just general ID. And that's a huge shift within the LGBT movement. It used to be that the T was either a silent or even a lowercase T at best. And what we're seeing today in this decade is that that's changing, and that's exciting because really the LGBT movement began with that partnership, and it's nice to see them return to that.
Excellent. And hopefully some of the gay organizations are starting to reevaluate, making that T more important.
Right here in Colorado, the center is doing that. There is a meeting scheduled once a month there, and the center is making itself available to transgender citizens that are adult, and at Rainbow Alley, which is one of their most dear programs.
And even at Colorado Outspoken, we've looked at our own programming and thought maybe that we hadn't inserted the T as much as we could be. So hopefully we're making better on that.
It's a meaningful partnership. Thank you.
I agree. So Alex, I'll go back to you. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who's just struggling with their gender identity?
I would say to find a way to reach out and make connections with other people in whatever way is most comfortable for that person.
Sure.
For some people, that'll be coming to a meeting at the GIC and meeting other people. For some people, it may be looking for resources on the internet, and certainly I think that has just revolutionized the coming out process for transgendered people.
Because for gay, lesbian, queer, and of any kind. Sure.
Because you can go. There are many very good, reputable, solid online groups through Yahoo and other websites where you can go. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question, you can at least for a while read other people's experiences and other people's questions, and then once you feel the confidence, you can ask your own and things like that. And that can help people kind of answer some of their initial questions in a more private atmosphere until then they feel ready to make other connections.
Sure. Eden, would you say that as Alex was talking about, kind of finding the community is this first step to really finding self-acceptance?
It can be, but for me, I think the best advice I would give someone actually begins just one step before then. Whether I was talking to someone who says they think they're transgendered or gay or lesbian or any other thing that's different, is to take a deep breath and realize that it can be okay. The kind of models that you spoke about earlier, the Jerry Springer paradigm of what transgender or even gay and lesbian people are like has been dispelled. That paradigm is destroyed, and the world is ready to accept you if you're ready to take your place at the table. And that can be anything that works for you, whatever is comfortable for you. So just take a deep breath and know that it doesn't have to be a tragedy. It can be just something that you learn to accept and work within and move on and still have a happy life, whatever that is going to be for you. And then you find yourself open to being able to find these resources and make these connections, because that connection won't really work if it doesn't begin within first, that self-acceptance first.
And I think you make a really good point that we just need to relax and take a step back at some points, because we, well, at least I can, kind of whip myself into a frenzy about certain things, and you think
that can be
this is the end of my life.
Absolutely.
This is it. Why am I? And a lot of people that I've talked to about their stories will say, it came to the end of my life. You know, I had some kind of awakening that this was really going to be the end of my life, and this is the way I've been dealing with it.
I'll know our work is nearing a different phase when we no longer hear people say that transition came to them as a result of choosing death or transition.
Right.
When transition comes to them as a choice of embracing their whole spirit, and so that we never have to get to that point the same way that lesbian and gay citizens are able to now. Very rarely do we hear people feeling that being gay or lesbian is a death sentence, and hopefully we'll get there for transgendered people as well and their families.
Alex, do you see that as coming soon, or do you see that as being kind of off in the horizon?
I think it's coming more and more. I certainly, although I did have my own struggles with depression, I don't think they were partially due to my being transgendered and partially due to other factors. But, you know, I think I was closer to that model of I see who I am now, and I know there are steps that I can take before I get to that crisis point.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit about what's coming up in the GIC, Alex.
We will have representatives both at the People's Fair and at the Pride Festival, both of those. So if people want to come and meet us in person, ask questions, get some contact information, we'd be happy to talk to them there.
Excellent.
He's a very friendly fellow. Also, the Gender Identity Center, as you mentioned at the beginning, sponsors a national level conference every year called the Colorado Gold Rush, and that's in February, right after Valentine's Day. And it might seem a bit early, but actually it takes that whole year to plan such a large conference, and we're coming up on our 10th anniversary. And if someone was interested, they could come to our meetings and find out what sort of plans we have in the works, and maybe even contribute some great ideas. This past year we were honored to have Dylan Kosla, a well-known, highly regarded author, as our keynote speaker for Friday. He was amazing, not just from a transgender point of view, but as an inspirational figure all on his own. And those are the kinds of things we're hoping to expand on for the 10th anniversary. So I would encourage anybody who has those kinds of skills to come on down and give us a hand.
Excellent. Well, would you like to give your website?
Yes, you can find, for the Gender Identity Center, is at www.gicofcolo.org, and you can either follow the link from there to Colorado Gold Rush, or you can go to www.cologoldrush.org.
Well, I know that we'll be hearing more from the Gender Identity Center in the future, and we look forward to it. I want to thank my guests, Eden Lane and Alex Brown, for being here and sharing their triumphs with us. I'm Fawn Oates for Colorado Outspoken.